The reason I like merit badge collecting is if you understand merit badge collecting, you can understand all rank. You can essentially understand everything that the Boy Scouts made from a manufacturing standpoint. Merit badges, they've been making them since 1911 to now. The weight of the cloth, the style of embroidery, all of that carries over to the other types of patches they were making in that same time period. In 1909 and into 1910, what you had the Boy Scouts of America essentially copied the British Proficiency Badges when they first did the handbook. Those were the merit badges. Now, I've never seen any evidence, but I've heard about scout units that started prior to 1910 may have ordered some of these proficiency badges from England and then issued them to scouts.
And Larry, I know a troop in Brewer, Maine, Troop 1, and their history very clearly said in 1908-9 they were ordering badges from England.
The really interesting part of these is that you can look at them and you can see ambulance, firemen, gardener, cyclist, electrician, signaler. A lot of these, you're going to see these provided the basis for the first Boy Scout of America merit badges. You have in 1911 to 1912, they first started making these squares. There were 57 different merit badge titles. So it went from 14 to 57. We know the art was done for all of them, and we think that they were probably all made, but only 22 titles were issued in 1911. So, like first aid, they only had 2 issued. Personal health, the most common one, they had 15 issued. But you're going to see over time, you start to see this exponential growth in these numbers of how many were issued in each year. So in 1912, it went up from 22 titles issued to 51 different titles issued, with 69 first aid being issued and 236 personal health. And that's a 1-year difference. Now, all of these were done on a hand-guided embroidery machine, which we'll dive into in a second. And the 1911 and 12, the way to tell the difference, if you look at that little figure at the bottom, is the counterclockwise embroidery on the outer oval. That's the way to tell if it's an 11 or 12. So from 13 to 21, you have the teen merit badges. I know you're sitting there going, but the 21, that's not a teen. Well, teen merit badges is almost a little bit of a misnomer, because what it is these are the hand-guided embroidery merit badges. And sometime around 20 to 21, that's when the hand-guided embroidery was replaced with a tape-guided embroidery. So in the past, the teen merit badges were called Type AA. Ron Oslin has been doing a lot of work with identifying these merit badges and doing a lot of that. And he's just referring to them as hand-guided embroidery merit badges. The designation for them is AHX, where X is a variation number. Because hand-guided embroidery was not very reliable, there were lots of variety. Some of them have 4 or 5, some of them have 10 varieties. It may be an AH1 or maybe AH10. Most of them, if they're mint, they're going to be 3-inch. But when they cut out the cloth, imagine you're paying someone minimum wage to cut out cloth for you. They're not going to sit there and measure and make sure everyone's a perfect 3-inch square. They're going to cut it roughly. So I've seen some that are bigger. I've seen some that are, a little smaller, but the mint size is generally accepted as 3-inch. And 1913 to 21, all of these have that clockwise border. So, and if you just look at the numbers issued in 13 for first aid, you had 165. And in 1920, you had almost 4,000. So you just start seeing this exponential growth in the numbers issued as you go later and later. So this is a hand-guided embroidery machine. When you see this, you can really understand why there's varieties. A man would have sat on that stool, he would have reached up and had that stylus, and the design would have been there in front of him. And he would have moved the stylus according to the design to make the patch. And that would have controlled the bobbins on the machine. That's how it was made. He moved by hand that stylus along the design. Over the years, there were surely different people who were working for these companies who made these patches. And so even if they used the same basic design, they could very easily get different variations. So here's first aid. I really like first aid as a teen because it actually, some of the varieties for some of the teens are very hard to see. First aid, the way the weave of the background, especially the red, and then you can see some of them have the cross stitch in the middle of the cross. You can at least kind of tell at first glance that, oh, these do look different. So what is a square? This is the most confusing thing among advanced merit badge collectors. They start talking about squares. Well, what do they mean? Do they mean a teen? Do they mean it? No, they don't mean a teen. They mean a 1920 to 33. So when they say a square, they're talking about a 20 to 33. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense until you realize that back in the day, when people were just starting to collect merit badges, they didn't really understand what teens were. They knew they were early, but they didn't differentiate them from all the other squares that were from 20 to 33. Later, teens got separated from the squares. The squares were type A. And so they decided, I guess we need to make something earlier. So we're going to call it a type AA. You saw a continued rapid membership growth. So in 21, you had right about 6,000 first aid issued, where in 33, you had right at 30,000. Compared to in the teens, I think there was around 10,000 first aid issued. In type A, there's over 200,000. And these were all made with tape-guided embroidery, which is a lot more consistent for mass production. And the designation form is ATX, where X is the variation number. And usually these are about 2 inch by 2 inch. They seem to be more consistent, but every now and then a tricky one will pop up and it'll be like 3 inch by 2 inch or 3 inch by 2 1/4 or something. So this is a tape guided embroidery machine. So you can imagine if you're going off a machine, even though this looks antiquated today, this was much more consistent than somebody sitting there with a stylus, moving the stylus around a design to make the patch. And you can also imagine that if they're making batches of patches, this is going to run much easier if they got to make thousands of patches versus where in the beginning they may have only been making dozens or, a gross or something. Here's some variations of first aid, and you can see that with the new style of embroidery, the design differences became almost negligible. They're very similar. Some slight differences in the center of the cross embroidery, but that's just about it. And all squares are clockwise direction on the border. So real quick about cloth. From 1911 to 33, and then they went back to it, but they used a heavyweight cloth that was called 2.10 khaki. It's very dense. It doesn't allow light to come through it. A lot of people collect merit badges differently. I met a guy and he collected khaki cloth squares and he collected tan cloth squares. Everyone can choose how they collect, but the way they selected cloth back in the day, they had to take a card that would have looked like this figure on the screen, and they would have had a tan limit and a green limit, and anything that was between them and close to the target was the cloth they would have used to manufacture the merit badge. So that's why you get some of one color and another. Ron is doing it based on designs, and I kind of like that. So that's how I've chosen to collect them. It's just how they actually embroidered the patch with a less emphasis on the color of the cloth. In 33, the Boy Scouts, it was the Depression. They wanted to go to a cheaper material. And so they went to a depression cloth, and there are depression cloth squares. It's a very light weave. There's this thing about it's one horizontal thread over 3 vertical thread and under 1 vertical thread. I can't see it. I may just be almost blind. I don't know. Anyone who can see that, I just salute you. But if you hold it up to a light, the light comes through it very strong. It's like holding up a piece of sheer or cheesecloth. I mean, it's just a whole lot of light will come through it, or that heavyweight material, it just doesn't happen. If I ever have to identify a depression cloth, I'm going to be holding it up to a light to just do it that way.
Larry, Terry here.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you're doing here is exactly what I shared when we were talking about the eagle patches, the square eagle patches from 20s and 30s, heavyweight cloth, depression cloth, the hand machine, the Shifley machine. You said earlier that if you know merit badges, you know the rest of the patches, that this is just a confirmation of what we did with the eagle patches. Just thought I would observe that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the great thing about merit badges is that they made them every year. So they exist in anything the Boy Scouts would have used for any type of rank or other insignia. So, but only 3 merit badges that I know of are confirmed on depression cloth. I think most of them are on depression cloth. I think most people don't realize the difference and sit there holding up squares to a light bulb to figure out which ones are which.